Basically, man first began to write in about 4000 BC, 6,000 years ago. And hieroglyphics were invented somewhere around 3200 BC. And for a long time, people used scrolls. In fact, the first books were not really invented until 3 to 400 AD. So it took 3,000 years to get to the first books after people started to write. And of course, those books were hand copied and block printed. It was another 1,000 years before we got to movable type. It was invented actually in China well before Gutenberg did it in Germany. And then from there, 500 more years to the internet. And with the advent of the internet, it's been 30 years to Google and RSS feeds. So there's obviously a lot of compression that's happened. It used to be that there was so little change over centuries that you didn't have to worry about job security and marketplace changes. And now anyone, I think, graduating today cannot count on a single stable career. Companies and institutions will come and go. Jobs will move or disappear. No job is secure. And what's happening in the newspaper business is just an example of this. This is happening in lots of other industries as well. But tonight we're going to focus on the news business. Go to the next one. And we've got, nope, sorry, go back the other way. These are out of order. We've got a great lineup. Tim Gallagher, I'm not going to go through their bio since you all have this. But the one thing I wanted to mention about Tim was that he's left obviously a real imprint on the Ventura County Star. In the last 12 months, their circulation has gone up 1.8%, whereas the United States average newspapers have gone down in the order of 7 to 10%, and our own news press here has had a circulation decline of 7.5% during that time. So Tim's clearly a man to listen to. I also would just like to mention something about Randy. This was, since all of this was put together, that the independent website has won two fairly significant awards. An Epi for the best website associated with a weekly newspaper in the United States, and more recently, the Association of Alternative Newspapers, they got second place. So their website is being noticed all over the country. So without saying any more, let me introduce Tim Gallagher, and then we'll just have each speaker go in order, and we'll move to the panel discussion. And keep track of your questions, because I think we'll have a lively discussion after it's over. Tim?
I have some really good news for you. I have the longest drive tonight, so I'll be the shortest speaker. And I think speeches that tend to go on longer than about 15 minutes wear out your backside before your brain. And so I'm going to be brief and try to get to the point. I want to point out tonight that I'm still an employee of the E.W. Scripps Company, and while they are not as likely as certain other newspaper owners to sue you when they say something they don't like, I'm going to be very careful in my remarks tonight. The title of my talk might well be How Newspapers Ate Their Seed Corn. Now, if you haven't been able to tell yet, I grew up in Brooklyn, and what I know about farming will fill a good-sized thimble. But what I understand about seed corn is that this is the stuff that farmers save, the stuff that they're going to plant in the ground so that they'll have food in years to come. And there's a temptation during those years when you're hungry, or years when you're not hungry but you just feel like eating, to eat your seed corn. And it's a very bad idea, because someday you won't have any crop if you keep eating your seed corn. And that's exactly what's happened in the American newspaper industry. They ate their seed corn. I'm going to illustrate that with a couple of examples from my life. I'm going to illustrate that with some real hard data. And then I'm going to conclude with some ideas about what I think they can do to survive, salvage, not to flourish again, because I don't think you'll ever see the day when newspapers are flourishing again. But let me just start with two stories. The first one is in 1990, I was editor of a very small paper in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, Albuquerque in 1990 was what passed for a wired community in America. We had some great technological laboratories there at Kirtland Air Force Base and Sandia Laboratories. And we were approached by some guys who wanted to put together something called a bulletin board service, BBS. Raise your hand if this is familiar to anybody. Okay, great. There are a couple of you guys who know what I'm talking about. It, in its day, was sort of the precursor, I guess, of instant messenger. You could get on your modem, and at the time, we thought we were cool because we had 1,200 baud modems, and let people talk to each other. And this was a subscription service. We put a few articles from the Tribune online, restaurant reviews, things like that. And for $5 a month, you could belong to our bulletin board service. And we started out with 8 modems. 8 modems. And within the first couple of weeks, we sold out the memberships because all 8 modems were busy every night from 6 to 10. So we went to the publisher and asked for 8 more, and he got 8 more lines and 8 more modems. And this grew and grew and grew until we had 64. And it was Mountain Bell West, I think, at the time, said, we can't get any more lines into your building. But we had 64 modems lit up every night between 6 and 10. And what people did was talk to each other on these modems on their computers. They didn't read any of the articles we had, they just talked to each other. Now, the E.W. Scripps Company at the time owned about 25 newspapers and 10 television stations. And I was this 34-year-old editor for them out in this place, far-flung place out in New Mexico. And I said, you know, guys, I want to raise my hand here for a minute. I think I got something here. I don't know what it is, and I'm not sure how we're going to make a business out of this, but we're making a little bit of money at this. People are paying for this, and they're using their computers to talk to each other. Now, stick with me. It's 2008. I want you to go back 18 years. Nobody had a cell phone. In 1990, we have people talking to each other on their computers. And the folks at Scripps gave me two pieces of feedback. One was, well, you can go ahead and play around with it, but don't lose more than $2,500 a year on it. Now, this is a company that in 1990 had an after-tax profit north of $100 million. But I couldn't lose more than $2,500 on it. And lastly, the second bit of advice I got was from the CEO of the corporation, who I went over the head of my boss, the CEO of the corporation, to plead with him, pay attention to this. Let's spend some research. Let's do something with this. And he writes me this letter telling me how he'd had this long conversation in an airport in Rome one night when he was delayed on a flight, and he was talking, CEO of E.W. Scripps was talking to the CEO of Knight Ridder, one of the other newspaper giants, and how they decided that, and I have this is a direct quote, I swear I have it in his letter, people will never read news on a computer screen. And this letter's dated in like March of 1990. They ate their seed corn. They went off and they took all their profits and did something else with it. The second example comes Monday morning. Monday morning, I get up and I'm an early riser, and at about I'm sitting in the kitchen at about 5:45, 6 o'clock, and I see my newspaper carrier drive up the street. Now, my newspaper carrier, I know him by first name. His name is Mike Tinoco. He was our Carrier of the Year a few years ago. He is a remarkable human being, so dedicated. And when you think about it, the delivery method that newspapers use is just, it's the most fouled up thing in the world. You put hundreds of millions of dollars and hundreds of people to put together this product that you put in the hands of somebody in a car driving 20 miles an hour in the dark and trying to hit a spot on the driveway before the sun comes up. I mean, just think about the physics of that. It's impossible, isn't it? But that's the way the newspaper industry works. We put that final product in that person's hands. And I saw Mike coming, so I walked down the driveway to see him. I said, how are you, Mike? And he looked very down. And I said, what's going on? He says, Tim, I can't make any money at this anymore. I haven't had an increase in my gas allowance since 2005. So I went back in the house. I looked up what the cost of a gallon of gas was in 2005. It's $2.45. Now, the way the newspaper industry pays its carriers, the last person between you and them is its independent contractors. Mike doesn't get any benefits from the paper. Mike doesn't get a 401k from the paper. He gets a bunch of newspapers that he has to come pick up every morning and then drive out to your house and deliver them, put it exactly where you want it, or you're going to scream for him. And if you don't put it where he wants it, where you want it, if he doesn't put it where you want it, the newspaper duns him $2 for not putting it where you want it. They haven't given him an increase in the cost of gas since 2005. They're eating their seed corn, guys. When it was making lots of money, the newspaper industry took all those profits and failed to invest them in new products. It kept raising its advertising rates, and those of you who paid them in this room know exactly what I'm talking about. Even when circulation was flat and falling. Think about this as a business model. Every year, you paid more for ads that reached fewer people. How did they get away with that? There was no competition. So when you think about it, why does someone named Craig own the classified advertising market these days? Why is there a Monster.com when newspapers used to own the Sunday Help Wanted ads? Why is there a Realtor.com when newspapers used to have fat real estate sections on Sunday? Why is there an Auto by Taylor or Cars.com when newspaper auto sections on Saturday are shrinking? because newspapers ate their seed corn. They did not invest. They let other entrepreneurs come in and steal the business from them. They had people running these companies saying people will never get their news off a computer screen. Now, my own company, E.W. Scripps, and the man I'm telling you that story about, they were a little better than most. At least they took their profits and put them in new businesses. E.W. Scripps was the company that started Home and Garden Television, okay? They were the company that really took the Food Network to new heights. So at least they took the profits from the newspaper business and put them into some other profitable businesses. And it's why they're around today, and companies like Knight Ridder are not around today, or why the great name in American journalism, Pulitzer, owns no newspapers, because they didn't do any of that stuff. But they did not, Scripps, New York Times, Gannett, none of them put any serious money into new technology. Now let me bring the view down from 30,000 feet a bit. Lots of newspaper companies went public. They went to Wall Street in the 1970s and 1980s, and this was a horrible, horrible thing. Newspaper companies tried to behave like other publicly traded companies. Scripps, the New York Times, Gannett, everybody tried to behave like General Electric or General Motors, and that was a mistake. Newspapers are not like other publicly traded companies. Newspapers, most of them anyway, are an important part of their local communities. It's almost like they're a sacred institution, not a government agency, but a good watchdog on government. Mills called them part of the fourth estate, a fourth branch of government. They cannot put up big profit margins like companies making widgets, because widgets are a cheap commodity that anybody can make. You can shave costs here or there and make more per widget, but you can't do that and produce good journalism, and that's what this is all about. Newspaper companies did not cut costs during this period. Indeed, they kept paying the journalists more. They kept paying higher and higher prices for things like health insurance and 401ks and things like that. They spent more during the 1990s as a business. And the way they tried to make it up was charging the advertisers more. But all of a sudden, the advertisers had some new alternatives. Now, let me come a little bit lower down. The shift in the newspapers in the 1990s was twofold. The revenue model shifted from one that was, the revenue came 35% from circulation in 1990 and 65% advertising. By the end of the decade, the shift was 17% revenue from circulation and 83% from advertising. And all of that growth was in classified advertising, the help wanted portion in the back. I don't mean to get esoteric about this. I will really bring this to a point where I think it's important to you. But that sound you heard at that time were the storm clouds gathering. Retail advertising, you buy a 2x3 inch ad, shifted to broadcast and into your mailbox, right? You started getting all this stuff in the mailbox. It shifted to weekly newspapers, and classifieds became the big kid on the block for newspapers. About 70% of the advertising came from classifieds, and that was fatal, because off in the distance there was this man named Craig Newmark up in San Francisco wondering, gee, what if I set up these websites where all the classifieds were free? And people who started Monster.com and other places like that were looking at that classified and saying, we can do this better online and make it more searchable and a lot easier to use. And we can charge a hell of a lot less than the newspapers because we don't have to pay for those big old printing presses or newsprint every day or Mike Tinoco to deliver it for us. And as internet products improved and users multiplied, the newspaper classified model was under egregious assault. Let me take 2007 just as an example. Classified advertisings for newspapers across America in 2007 did $14.2 billion. But that sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? It is. It's also 16% less than they did in 2006. And this year, the number will drop by close to 20%. So let me help you with the math here, okay? 70% of the revenue, 83% of the revenue, which comes from 70% classified, has declined by better than 1/3 over the last 2 years. And you wonder why the newspaper industry is in such disruption. Their revenue model is fading like sand underneath your feet. So you see massive layoffs in newspapers. You see newspapers closing. You see smaller newspapers. You see some newspapers not even coming out every day. In Ohio, there's one that's coming out every 2 weeks. You see bureaus being closed. Do you know there are fewer than 10 American full-time reporters in Baghdad today? Fewer than 10 reporters covering what I think I would argue is probably the most important story in the world right now, okay? Let me just go back a decade. There would have been 50, 60, 75 newspapers with representatives in Baghdad. Today, there are about 6 newspapers with a total of 10 journalists in Baghdad, okay? I'm afraid what you're going to see when the newspaper industry comes out of this is a real shadow of its former self. It's in a downward spiral, and nobody thinks it can be saved. but some people think it can be salvaged. And the guys on the panel with me tonight are actually taking some of the ideas and salvaging what remains of the newspaper business. And I think for the most part, what I know of most of these guys, are doing a really good job at it. But here's what I think newspapers can do to salvage this. One is the internet. Now, for years, as the case I gave you exemplified, newspaper industry executives looked at the internet with trepidation, with denial, or outright rejection. And many newspaper companies, reporters I worked with refused to put their stories on the internet site at my newspaper because they were afraid of scooping themselves. They were afraid that if the story appeared on the internet site at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they would scoop themselves because the newspaper wouldn't hit the driveway until tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Can anybody explain this logic to me? It makes no sense. Right now, in the newspaper industry, online advertising represents about 10% of the total advertising. The trouble with what that number is, it's a false number. Most newspapers have a forced upsell, so that when you buy an ad in print, they give you a little surcharge for putting it on the website, and it's really not a true sell. I think their future is in third-party alliances with people who are doing the technology right. Scripps, for instance, has gotten into a technology sharing with Yahoo, and New York Times is in one with Monster right now, and I think that's the only way they're going to salvage these things, because these other people have built far better technology than the newspaper industry will ever build. The second way to salvage it for them is in these sort of niche mousetraps, little publications that they can do to appeal to certain niches in an audience, in a community. I think that's a possibility for them. Lastly is in retail territories. Local advertising remains one of the strengths that newspapers have. They have more salespeople selling ads in local communities for newspapers than any other industry. Somewhere around 75,000 people are retail territory advertising sales rep for newspapers in America today. And that dwarfs any other industry, so they've got a possibility there. And finally, the best thing I think they can do to save themselves is just produce better journalism. Just produce better journalism. The journalism that's out there today is in this strange sort of amalgam of what happens in an industry when it's being disrupted. They're not really sure where it's going. But there are two things I think newspapers can continue to do well. One is to cover the local community on two levels. One is the chicken dinner news. If we cover, when I was at the Star, part of the reason for our circulation growth, we covered freshman football games for our high schools in Ventura County. Just because we know there are probably about 800 kids playing freshman football in Ventura County, and 800 times 2 parents times 4 grandparents equals more subscribers, okay? And the second thing is to do more local hard edge, local journalism, to cover your community in a way that nobody else can. Those are what I think is there for the to salvage the wreck, but make no mistake about it, it is a wreck, and they've got no one else to blame but themselves. Thanks very much.
Hello. First of all, thank you all for coming, and I applaud your good taste in recognizing that Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young has sucked ever since Neil Young left. So, Tim's program will be significantly different from what I have to say, because we have done news in a different way ever since we started. The corporate interest has never been part of our model. It has never been, the way our paper started was, I was a 25-year-old kid that wanted to start a newspaper because I really liked Rolling Stone and I really liked the Village Voice. And I borrowed $700 from my roommate and started working really hard. So it's always been, just like real estate, it's always been, for us, it's always been local. The things I was interested in were the things that I felt other people would be interested in. What now I can look back and define as my marketing philosophy or my editorial philosophy or the way we built our company really was following the instincts of something that simple, which is if I felt it was something I'd be interested in, other people might be interested in picking up our newspaper as well. This is in 1980. And it's interesting to look back now, because everything the newspaper business, as Tim so ably described, is attempting to do, all their saving graces, all the big new ideas that they've got are things we were doing 28 years ago now. More and more newspapers are going free by providing online product. Back in 1980, when we had a free newspaper, people were saying, they always asked me this question, well, how do you make money? Because somehow they thought that the 25 cents there, or 15 cents they're paying for a newspaper somehow paid for that paper. As Tim ably told you, they weren't making it on circulation. And the sad little secret about daily newspapers is circulation is a zero-sum game. There's this, they lose as many subscribers as they have, and they have full organizations devoted to keeping their subscriber base at a set level in order to convince advertisers that their paper is being read. In my stumbling luck of creating a newspaper, I thought, we'll give it out for free. We'll sell ads to cover the costs. I might make some money, and as my dad told me, for 25 years, you're making about 50 cents an hour now, aren't you? So I'm happy to say I'm making a little bit more than that, and we have employees now that have worked for us for some of them as long as 25 years. They're actually have grandchildren now, and we have, I think the typical tenure of folks that work for us is at least 10 years. That's certainly the average. Is I'd posit well above 10 years. We got 50 employees. But if I can ascribe anything to success other than hard work, I would say our conviction to make everything we covered local, to be ruthlessly local, as I used to tell my staff, is been our meal ticket for 28 years. I don't. Some of the other things that daily newspapers are now trying to do is trying to become local, but they still are wedded to. And Joe Cole will tell you this. I used to tell him when we'd meet in his office that I said, I don't understand why the news press doesn't put their local stories on the cover. Because back in the days that Joe was representing my firm instead of the news press, they had, as a typical daily newspaper had at the time, national news in the first part, local news in the second part, lifestyle in the third part, and if they were lucky enough to have a fourth part, maybe that'd be classified. These days, that formula has been reversed even within our own daily papers' priorities. I think just like politics is all local, I think our news is all local, and following that dictum online and in our printed product, I think is something that's going to continue to serve us well. In spite of the bleeding and the layoffs and the news that you will read, since there's nothing more interesting to newspapers than covering their own problems. In spite of all that coverage, you see our paper, through a variety of circumstances, some you may be aware of and some you may not, has had our last 5 years. Well, we've never gone backwards in our revenues, and every year has been significantly better than the previous year. And our last 2 years, we've grown 25%. So I want to thank Mrs. McCaw first and foremost, and I want to thank you, the community. So I'm less interested in what I have to say about newspapers, and kind of would like to provide this opportunity to get a little free market data from you all in the form of questions, and maybe be able to answer some questions you might have about it. But yeah, I'm more interested to hear what you have to say than what I have to say, as well as these gentlemen. I'm interested to hear what they have to say. Thanks a lot.
To lean down to talk. My name is Jeremy Gordon. I'm the editor and publisher of the Santa Barbara Daily Sound. My start in journalism is a lot similar to Randy Campbell's, actually. When I was a sophomore in college, I got a part-time job bussing tables, and on my breaks, I would pick up the leftover newspapers that were kind of hanging around and just sit around reading them. And there was two papers I read on a daily basis when I was about 18 years old. And one was the San Jose Mercury News, and the other was a little tiny paper called the Palo Alto Daily News. And I found more and more, I didn't have to pay for either one since customers left them in the restaurant for me. But one was a paid newspaper. The San Jose Mercury News was a broadsheet, full-size, as big as it gets kind of newspaper. And the other one was the Palo Alto Daily News, which was a free paper. And I'd find myself more and more just reading the Palo Alto Daily News, because as someone who was 18 years old and not necessarily caring what was going on in Washington, D.C. or in Sacramento at the time, the Palo Alto Daily News covered what was going on around the corner. They told me who was being arrested, what local lawmakers were breaking the law or doing good things and stuff like that. And I found it a lot more interesting than things going on in other parts of the country. So I found myself more and more reading this newspaper. And one day out of the blue, I called the editor of the paper and I said, I would like to report for you. And he like kind of laughed at me. He's like, you're a sophomore in college? I'm like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing, but it looks like it might be fun. And he kind of laughed it off, and we never did anything. But I bought a digital camera and a police scanner, and I started going around to fires and crimes and stuff like that, and taking pictures and writing little stories. And I started sending them off to the editor, unsolicited. And then one day, I'm at the coffee shop, and I just finished cleaning up, and I'm taking my break, and I pull up the Palo Alto Daily News, and there's my photo on the front page of the Palo Alto Daily News, and it says, Palo Alto Daily News photo by Jeremy Gordon. And I'm like, wow, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. My name in print it just blew me away. I mean, I was so excited. I called up the editor that day, and I was like, now can I have a job? And he said, yeah, but I can't pay you anything. I'm like, I don't care, that's fine. I'll go work. So I went down there, and I dressed in a suit and tie that my parents had got me for high school graduation that didn't fit a little bit because I had gained the freshman 25. And I walk in the door to the Palo Alto Daily News, and it was the messiest office I'd ever seen in my entire life. People were wearing shorts and flip-flops, and I was the most overdressed person in the whole entire room. And I had no idea, but I sat down and I met with the editor, and I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, I'll offer you an internship. You can come in. You have to put in at least 20 hours a week, and I can't pay anything. And I was like, I'll do it. I'll take it. So I started off on the sports desk, really, taking phone calls from high schools that called in, writing down agate, taking the scores, just writing little tiny briefs and all that kind of stuff. But I eventually worked my way up through the ranks of this newspaper, and within 2 years of working there, I was asked to be the managing editor of the entire chain of 6 daily newspapers that they owned at that time. And then about a year later, a company called Knight Ridder, who you heard Tim speak of a little bit, bought the chain of newspapers. These were independently owned daily newspapers. There was 5 of them at the time, and Knight Ridder paid $25 million to acquire these newspapers in 2005. I started working for Knight Ridder a little bit, and I realized that the corporate world really wasn't for me. I really enjoyed the independently owned, having to be able to go sit down with the publisher of the paper who owned it and say, this isn't working, can we change this? And he said, go for it, do whatever you'd like to do. And the whole atmosphere really changed when a corporation came in. We couldn't even hire anyone without going through drug tests and all kinds of stuff, and it really became a headache. So I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. And I went and I talked to my parents, and they said, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I think I could do this on my own. And they didn't laugh, to my surprise, and they said, we think you can too. And they gave me some money, and I came here to Santa Barbara, and on March 23rd, 2006, I started the Santa Barbara Daily Sound. I like to think of myself as being incredibly stupid more so than incredibly lucky when we started the Daily Sound. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had no idea at the troubles at the news press. I had no idea what was going on, but within before the end of the first year of the Daily Sound, we were financially sustainable. We were making more money than we were spending, which in the business world is a good thing. And we've kind of maintained this model where we're growing the paper organically. We don't do it when the trouble started happening at the news press. We got a lot of pressure from the community. A lot of people saying, well, we need a daily newspaper. We need someone to step up and fill the void that the news press left. And we couldn't handle that. We didn't have the millions of dollars in backing and all that kind of stuff, but we tried our best, and we did what we could do. And everyone today who tells me, oh, how lucky you were to have come in at such the right time, I kind of tell them it wasn't necessarily that, because there was a lot of pressure put on us to then replace the news press, which we could not do, we did not want to do. So we just continued with our business model, and I think the public started to realize that, well, you know, they're not going to be the news press, but they are offering us something that we're not getting. So we built this really great following. We started printing. When we first started, we printed 2,500 papers 5 days a week, and now we print 10,000 papers a day, 6 days a week, in 2 years. So we've seen tremendous growth. Our revenue and on both sides as well. So it's really interesting. And there's a lot of talk these days about newspapers dying. You know, everyone says people don't read newspapers anymore. And I think to a certain extent that's true. Regional newspapers that try to cover more than just their local communities are dying off. You know, the San Francisco Chronicle at one time boasted close to 1 million circulation, and now they're down, I think, about 500,000 or even less. So they, you know, the papers that try to cover a lot more than within their local grasp are suffering. But there's a phenomenon growing in community newspapers that just cover their community and do it really well. And the readers realize that, and they're looking at that, and they realize that's what they want. Because yeah, they can go online and find out what's going on in Iraq, what's going on in Capitol Hill, and all that kind of stuff. But if they want to know who got a DUI last weekend, you know, and stuff like that, they have to pick up their local paper. They're not going to find that online. So there's still a draw to these community-based newspapers. And then, so in addition to being a community-based newspaper, we have another plus on our side, which is that we're free, which is a relatively new concept in the newspaper world, being free. Alternative weeklies have been free for decades, and the actual free daily dates itself back to like the 1940s, but they really started becoming popular in the mid 1990s, and now there's free dailies in more than 36 countries across the world, and especially in Europe. Almost every country in Europe has multiple free dailies, and they're growing like wildfire over there, and they haven't really caught on here because people don't really know what business model to take with the free dailies. There's a couple different approaches going on right now. There's Philip Anschutz, who owns the San Francisco Examiner and the Baltimore Examiner. His business model with a free daily is to start off large, blanket the city with hundreds of thousands of free papers, deliver them to everyone's doorstep, and hopefully the advertising revenue will follow. Our model is extremely different than that. Our model was to start small, and as the advertising revenue starts to come in, increase our distribution. I think that seems to be the most successful way at the moment. So we're in our third year of publication, and we're doing fantastic. Our page count continually increases, and it's been a rough ride. It's been fun. Everyone told me that when I first started that you're going to lose your shirt, but the only thing I lost, thankfully, was my hair. And yeah, so I really do believe that, honestly, that the newspaper industry is going to be around for a very long time. It definitely does need to change. It definitely needs to start incorporating the web in more that it does. But people still appreciate the print product. I was up in Palo Alto just 2 weekends ago, and I was flying out of the San Jose airport, and I stopped off at a Pete's Coffee in San Jose. And San Jose, California is the technology sector, technology capital of the world. I mean, that's where Yahoo, eBay, Google, all those companies are in San Jose. And I walk into a Pete's Coffee about 2 hours before my flight, and everyone I see there is reading a newspaper. Everyone. There's 1 or 2 people on a computer, but everyone there, and these are people who are designing the websites that you use on a daily basis, who are, have to know more about the web than anyone, and they're sitting there reading a newspaper. And I thought to myself, if that's not a sign that print is still alive and well, then there's really no other better way of saying it. So, as very large newspapers like the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, the LA Times do see declines in circulation, small community newspapers are continuing to thrive, and thanks to readers like yourselves who do pick up the Daily Sound every day, right? Every single morning. Appreciate it. So that's about what I have to say. Thank you.
That's a tall act to follow. Thank you very much for having me tonight. I'm Bill McFadden. I'm the founder and publisher and CEO and janitor at newshawk.com. And I thought what I would do is give you a little bit of my background to establish my bona fides, and then talk a little bit about the MBA that I learned the hard way from the South Coast Beacon University, and then how that transpired or made the transition into this opportunity with NewsHawk. Newspapering is in my blood. My grandfather founded the Malibu Times in the mid-40s, and that newspaper is still in business today and actually thriving. Of course, the difference between my grandfather and me is that he was a very successful businessman who started a newspaper. I was a modestly successful newspaper man who started a business. One does not guarantee the success of the other. I got my start at the Houston Post, which was at the time, I think, the 23rd or 24th largest daily newspaper in the country. That was in the mid-'80s. And I was on the copy desk. It was a great time to be in newspapers, and it was a full-scale newspaper war with the Houston Chronicle. And as soon as having grown up in California and always wanted to live in Santa Barbara, as soon as I had access to the Post's stationery, I immediately started bombarding the Santa Barbara News Press with pleas and begging, and to bring me back to California and please let me come to work for the News Press. I thought it was the dream job. It was the most awesome building at the time. There was no air conditioning. It was just throwback California, and what a great opportunity for a young journalist. So after a few years of me peppering them, the New York Times bought the company and decided that they were either going to have to take out a restraining order on me or just go ahead and bring me out and see what happened. So I came out in '87, helped with the transition to take the newspaper from an afternoon delivery cycle to a morning delivery cycle. I was running the copy desk, was the front page editor, and over the 15 years that I was at the News Press, I was able to recruit the exact copy desk that I wanted. Had the opportunity to work with some great journalists like Ray Estrada here, who's now at the Business Times, Barry Punzel, who's somewhere, there he is. And Maria Zate, who's also here tonight. And it was a great opportunity. And then in its infinite wisdom in 2000, the New York Times decided that it was done with Santa Barbara. For whatever reason, it was going to sell the newspaper and kind of retrench back into the southeastern United States, where a lot of their regional newspaper group publications were. So immediately, the culture in that building changed with the ownership. And I won't dwell too much on that, but it was clear to me that I had no future there. It was not air that I wanted to breathe, and so it took me about 8 months to gather the courage to look my staff in the eye and say, you know what, I'm sorry I've recruited you here, but I've got to go. But I did, and resigned in August 2001. The very next year, started the South Coast Beacon with my former boss at the News Press, Tom Bolton. And that was an interesting thing. We felt that being two newspaper journalists coming out of the newsroom, that we knew exactly what a community wanted, knew exactly how to put out a newspaper, that it couldn't be that difficult to put out a weekly newspaper, and realized very quickly that we were way in over our heads. It was a lot harder than it looked, so there's some expensive lessons we learned there. But among the things that I did learn is that you've got to listen to your community, and you've got to be really responsive to your readers, and that if you do that, your readers will take ownership of your publication, and then they in turn will be the evangelist for you. And there's no way that at a startup publication or a very small operation that you can actually go out and touch all the customers that you need to. But if your readers start doing that for you, then that gains the momentum. Unfortunately, not enough readers like Larry Crandall did that, and after 3 years, we made the decision to pull the plug and shut it down. That was in July of 2005. Great run. We won a lot of awards. We won the California Newspaper Publishers Association's General Excellence Award, which for us, a staff of 10 people in a tiny little building in downtown Santa Barbara, was quite an achievement, because we were going against papers that were 10 or 11 times our size and had been in business for 100 years. So, but again, the community just didn't accept the Beacon. So anyway, I figured at that point I was done with newspapers. I started doing some research into specialized publishing. And then in July of 2006, something happened in Santa Barbara that got me thinking about, again, about news delivery. And the first thing I thought of was, man, Jeremy Gordon gets to town, 4 months later, something happens, and he's just hit the timing just right. And here, I've been here for 20 years, and I missed the whole thing. I was too early. But anyway, it got me to thinking about news delivery and wondering whether the time was right for people to, both consumers and businesses, to go online and get their news and get their advertising. So I went back to our Beacon readers and our Beacon advertisers, and I asked them, you know, would you do this? And to a person on the advertising end, it was very interesting. All of them said, print's dead, I've got to be on the internet, absolutely. A couple of them said, just tell me how much. And so I thought about that, and what was interesting about that is a lot of it was due to the situation with the Santa Barbara News Press. That was the instigator to a lot of this. But when you step back and talk to whether it's real estate or car dealers or retail, in that industry that they were in, those advertisers were in, that's all they heard. Internet, internet, internet. So it was a little bit of peer pressure, a little bit of herd mentality, and I thought, well, interesting. If we can actually get those people to sign contracts, then we're good to go. So then I would talk to consumers, readers, and uniformly, and I'll put myself in a younger group, people my age and below was absolutely already on the internet, get all my news that way, not interested in a print product, yada, yada, yada. People my age and above, it was like, nope, I've got this routine I've been doing for 40 years, not gonna happen. Well, as the situation with the news press kind of dragged on, those older readers, which are for generations now have been retirees who are core newspaper readers, more and more of those people were saying, and this was all anecdotal, of course, but more and more of those people were saying, you know what, I'm actually going online to get my news. I'm picking up other sources that I never thought I would. I'm not depending on that daily newspaper coming to my house in the morning and me sitting down at the breakfast table to read it. And it's not that bad. So anyway, then I went back to some advertisers and convinced enough of them to jump in the boat to basically give us some seed funding to get started, and we were out the door, launched in October of '07. And so a lot of the lessons that I learned from the Beacon, I'm trying not to repeat those same mistakes. The Beacon lost a ton of money. It was a great product, probably too good for this marketplace, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. It was, we put a lot of effort into the design and to the layout and to the thinking on how people would take that paper and read it, and we really didn't need to do that. People were just interested in us telling them what happened. And so with NewsHawk, what we're trying to do is basically do that, tell them what happened. And so we're attacking this community in two different ways and trying to disrupt the marketplace in two different ways. We have a very, very small staff of professional journalists. They're doing their own reporting. One of them is here tonight, Sonia Fernandez. I'll embarrass her. And Rob Kuznia is our other one. And they kind of do their own thing. Rob's basically in Santa Barbara. Sonia's basically in Goleta. They each know the communities very well, and there's a little bit of overlap, so it's great. And they're investigating their own stories, following up on tips, producing their own news. Then we have some freelancers, and Karen Talene Lawton is here tonight. She's one of our contributors. Karen Dwyer is also one of our contributors. And they're sending us some news and a little bit of stuff that we know about. It's scheduled. And then what we're doing, because it's the internet, and I guess the hurdle for entry into this is a little lower, we're depending on the community to extend our reach into areas that our competitors and other publications either cannot, will not, or are incapable of covering. And so if we have 2 reporters, 10 reporters, 100 reporters in a community the size of Santa Barbara and Goleta, about 200,000 people, we will always be outnumbered. But if we can depend on the community to reliably submit their own news, cover their own stuff, we'll do a little bit of editing. It's all an organizational challenge, which so far we've been able to manage. But we think that actually extends our reach into the community, makes the community smaller, and at the end of the day, that's a really good thing for Santa Barbara and certainly for NewsHawk and its advertisers. Our delivery model it's all internet. You can come to the website. We ask you to sign up for a daily e-letter. Comes out, it's all free. Eventually we're going to get to, I hope, otherwise my wife will kill me, get to the point where it's all advertising supported. It's not there yet. We're 8 months into this, but you know, we're closing that gap, and we're trying to live within our means, and you know, really appreciative of the way the community, the advertising community has responded. We think we've got a lot of that figured out, and certainly are getting a good track record with a lot of those companies. And you know, the risks, we're supposed to talk about risks. The risks obviously are, you know, for me, like any entrepreneur, is, you know, you've got to spend more time working on the business than in the business. Ours is a very small staff. It's, you know, when I'm done here tonight, I'm going to go home and wait for Sonia's story to come in, and then I'm going to edit it and post it, because we've got one of our staffers is on vacation this week. And so it's kind of everybody on our staff is very entrepreneurial, happy to help do other things. Pretty much, you know, whatever I ask them to do, it's been very, you know, real assuring and beneficial to us. And those are the kinds of things that we, you know, confront every day. Obviously, advertising in an uncertain economic time is a challenge. We are feeling pretty good about our prospects because although larger companies seem to be a little reticent to jump in the boat, smaller companies don't seem to have that resistance and are at least so far supporting us. We're getting almost a 85-90% renewal rate. Most of our contracts are long-term, which is good. And we think that we've got a pretty good product. We think there's a few areas that we excel. K-12 education issues are, based on our traffic, are among the best. Planning and development issues, county budgeting, nonprofits, and we've identified some areas that we'll be pursuing next. But it's been a great experience, and you know, I don't want to dwell too much on the negative of the, you know, what ultimately was a failure, the South Coast Beacon, but everything that we've been doing is really born out of the lessons that we learned there. So again, thank you very much. I'm really appreciative to be here with the MIT folks.
Alex have some slides. Oh, good. How do I click them? Oh. Just do every one at once, okay? You don't do the individual ones. My name is Peter Sklar. I'm with the Ed Hat online magazine. And I want to tell everybody, the big question is, I'm not Ed. I'm married, I have 2 kids. I have an MA in statistics. See, I don't come from a journalism background. At UCSB, I've been in Santa Barbara for 20 years. And I've done 4 startups and 3 patents. I want to talk about 2 companies I started up because they relate to how I got to where I am. The first one is Datadrill, and maybe many people here from the .com years ago when we were hitting the streets looking for money for Datadrill. Datadrill was a really cool search engine that we wrote for the internet. We got some angel capital, and we went out of business pretty quickly because we started too late. That's why. And but anyway, luckily I had some patents and some technology that's helped me out with funding other companies in the future. My other company I ran is called Cool Maps. We started in Santa Barbara in '96. We do mapping applications. Bank of the West is a sponsor here. If you go to the Bank of the West website and click on Find the Nearest Branch, you actually use the Cool Maps branch locator application to do that. We got more interested in this other product called NetObjects Fusion. NetObjects Fusion was a web design tool, and we started creating plugin components for NetObjects Fusion. And the users of NetObjects Fusion, they were pretty hyped on the product, and they were like Mac users. And we started realizing that there was more value in creating a community around these users than it was actually just selling them pieces of software. So we created this thing in 1999 called the Cool Maps Components Club. And we would send out a weekly newsletter. We had games and contests and profiles and a lot of really, really fun stuff. And we created this incredible energy around our community. And NetObjects, unfortunately, had an IPO, went to $1 billion market cap, and went out of business in a year. But what we took out of this was this idea that community could be created on the internet. And pretty much Ed Hat is taking this community idea that I had from before and applying it to Santa Barbara. And I've been doing Ed Hat since 2003, and that's really the goal. The goal isn't news, it's community. Go on to the next page. Okay. What does Ed do for you? Just for people who don't know Ed Hat, we go out in the community every day and write stories. And our stories are a little different than most stories. They challenge people to look around them. We count things. We count trees, shoes, cell phones, and Santa hats. We also point out things that maybe people don't notice. I put in my notes here. We point out frog shrines, and there's somebody here who lives near the frog shrine. Poems, plaques, and public art. And we've also gathered the prices. We've brought the prices of things: gas, milk, haircuts, and body piercings. Pretty much, we cover the content that no one else covers. But the idea is that what's interesting? Is it a car crash? Is it a DUI? Or is it the price of body piercing? They're all things that can bring a community together, information that people can share on the same page. Also, as a convenience to our reader, after the News Press went out of business, or whatever they did, we compile links to local online news stories, and this has become a very popular part of our website. There's some other things I list here that we do. We have photo galleries, we have columnists, we have contests, people win t-shirts. We have a dog and the cat of the week, and don't underestimate the dog and cat of the week. People love to see pictures of their cat and dog online, and it's amazing how people like respond. Some people think we're only a cat site, I tell you. Last we have a comments board, and everybody has a comments board. On the next slide, I want to tell you why Ed is different, and this really relates to, I'm invited here to talk about news, but we're not a news site. That's really the bottom line, is that I'm not here to report news. We're here to build community, and that's really, maybe a newspaper could be seen as something that used to build community. Everybody had God delivered to their front porch, and everybody's on the same page. But really, the community is the most important thing and one of my taglines is we try to bring people closer together and make them feel more part of their community. And that's really the goal of Ed Hat. It isn't to report news at all. Being informed on the news is a part of the whole picture, but the internet provides us with the ability to do so much more, and that's the direction we're going. There's the next thing. There's no question in my mind. There's been some talk about whether the paper will live or die. A paper, to me, is old news on dead trees. That's pretty much what a paper is. The news, the second you print the news on the newspaper, it's not news anymore. It's old stuff, and the trees have to die for that, and that's no good. Packets will win. I mean, it might be a slow death or a long death, or 10 years or 5 years or 3 years. Packets are going to win, and Ed Hat is going to be delivering news by packets, and we're never going to kill a tree. These next two are kind of, you can put them all up. The old vision of a newspaper, and I don't know, I'm not a journalist, is a smoky room with people, talking about what stories to cover and what should be on the front page. We don't have to do that on Ed Hat because we have a very democratic way of delivering the news. One thing we do is people submit stories to us, photos, everything, links and stuff, and what we do is we put them all up. We don't question. We don't say maybe this should go up or maybe this shouldn't go up. We put everything up, obviously within reason, that gets sent to us, and that's a very powerful thing because somebody says, hey, why didn't you cover my event? Why didn't you cover me, what I'm doing? And we get a lot of that because there's a lot of PR people out there. We just say, hey, because you didn't write a story about it, and send it to us. And so if they do write a story and send it to us, we'll put it up. And if not, maybe it wasn't that important and it shouldn't be included. The other thing we talk about is the readers vote. The readers vote by what they click on, what they read. I mean, we're not telling somebody that this is an important story and this isn't an important story. We just list all the stories and people click away. We have a very good thing on Ed Hat. We list, and people have been on our website, you can see how many times these people click on different stories. We every time somebody clicks, it adds one to the count. And what you see is that people click on things that maybe you don't think they should or would click on. And it's amazing that on the list of things like sports stories, no one ever clicks on sports stories. They're like 5 clicks. But if Jennifer Aniston is smoking cigarettes at the Bacara, you know, we get a lot of hits on that one. Lastly, Ed Hat is a different style of news. When we have a voice, it's a very quirky, irreverent voice, and I think the future of news journalism will have to change its voice, because the kids out there today who are reading the news is coming a little dry to them, and if it doesn't have personality, I just can't see it having a future with the new generation who isn't reading newspapers today, and I think that's important. Okay, go on. Just to give you the numbers on Ed Hat, we like numbers. We have 5,400 subscribers. We send out an email to them 6 days a week. That's about 100,000 emails a month. We've just recently been asking people to pay voluntarily for subscriptions, and we've been very happy that 200 people have stepped up and given us money, even though they don't really get anything for it. We do about 300,000 pages plus a month, which is a very equivalent number to the Independent and the News Press. We really think that our page views are very, very high quality. 63% of our visitors are local, and 84% of our visitors are regulars. And to us, those numbers are significantly higher than other publications. Just to tout our horn here, the Independent's a cool, very cool newspaper, and they voted us the #1 website in Santa Barbara. And we voted them the #1 newspaper. And then here's this really cool thing, placeblogger.com, which is a local website. What we are, the place blog, hyper local journalism, there's hundreds of names for what we do. Place blogging is one. They call us the 2nd best place blog in the entire country, and I think we're better than the best. So. I want to read you, I have a lot of time, I want to read you a very long quote on the next page. And I want to read this to you because this kind of tells you what our goals are, and in my mind shows evidence that we're achieving them. Every March we have a contest in Ed Hat where we show pictures. This is the Ed Hat content. We show pictures, 2 pictures a day, and people guess them, and they get points for guessing them right. And at the end of the month, we add up the points, and we give trophies and have an award ceremony. It seems kind of, it's the Ed Hat style, but people really get into this. I'm telling you, it's a very competitive sport, March Edness. And here's a woman who played March Edness this year. I'm going to read this really fast because I know you guys probably don't want to hear all these words. But it says, "Thank you for March Edness 2008. It was my first introduction to reading your site daily. I opened Ed Hat on the first day of the picture contest and soon found myself hooked. Never did I expect I would have finished a winner. I spent the prior year consumed by cancer treatments, and through each day's pictures was reminded of the uniqueness and beauty of our Santa Barbara surroundings. It was like the old adage, take time to smell the flowers, only this time I was taking time to appreciate the pictures. Your photography is fantastic. I will always remember March 2008 for this awesome experience and the many adventures it brought me in searching for each picture's location. Who knew I'd be interviewing Hells Angels, the Highway Patrol, Rincon Surfers, the American Institute of Architects, Santa Barbara Fire Department, the Franciscan Order of Friars, so many others in the pursuit of a picture location. Thank you for putting together the awards ceremony and making each award special." See, that's why we're in business. We're in business to make people's lives better. Okay, next slide. Now, obviously, this is a venture forum and people are interested in money. Ed Hat is sustainable. We make money on advertising subscription revenue, and it's an amazing deal. We have pretty much no costs at all. We have no printing costs, no delivery costs, no advertising reps. We don't pay any reporters, and we have all our content is citizen provided. You can go. So why are we sustainable? Well, because we make enough money to cover our costs that don't exist. Okay, the next slide. What's ahead? Now, this is really the exciting thing. I think the market is finally here. I've been doing this for 4.5 years, and now we're finally getting some traction behind us, and we got some big plans. And the first thing is that we know the future is mobile, and the future is video. There's no question. Everybody's got an iPhone, they're gonna be watching video. It's so cool, you can watch YouTube videos on your iPhone. The print is gonna die because of video as well. And it's gonna die because people have access to it in their pocket to carry stuff around. And Ed Hat's gonna be on the video mobile applications like white on rice, pretty much. Integration, Ed Hat is also working to integrate our sites with social networking. Social networking is gigantic, and our site will be a part or some part of MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because a community is just an extension of a social network of friends, and that's what keeps us going. Social networks are great for connecting groups. We want to build a big community. Communities are made up of social networks. Also, the more interaction with the physical world is very important to us. Because we've been doing some of it with our Where Is It's and our contests, but we're going to do more because people want physical contact with each other in their community, but also advertisers want people to be physically contacted to them. So one problem with web advertising today is in the local market is you kind of remove, there's this banner and then there's the business. To get people actually physically in the world, to get dressed and to shave and leave their house and then go to the business is actually quite a hard thing to do. And our work's going to be to create more physical interaction. We're working on a better advertising platform to make more ads more targeted and effective and easier for small businesses to place ads. And we're going to be so successful that we're going to expand into other communities. So if Ed Hat works in Santa Barbara, that's the big ticket, and why wouldn't it work in Peoria or something like that? There's some pictures here. I'm going to go really quickly if you guys indulge me. The pictures here, just want to show you some Ed Hat content to show you that the great things that the great journalism that we've uncovered in Santa Barbara. The first one is that first picture was, I don't know if you noticed in the first slide, that was on the rock at Franciski Park. Everybody knows that? The second thing is that the second slide was of palm trees. We counted the palm trees. There's 1,299 palm trees on the beach side of Cabrillo from East Beach to Ledbetter. The third slide was of a shopping cart. We counted 62.5% of shopping carts are returned to the store or placed in the proper rack. The third one, I don't know if you've seen this third one. The third one was an arrow on the ground. You see that? That's in front of the courthouse on Anacapa Street. You really cool. You don't see it, and then you look at it, and you'll never not see it. And the third one was next one was dogs. We count dogs of the dog parade. We have a chart showing the number of dogs in the dog parade each year. This year there are 800. And then the last slide is the worst intersection in town. Where's the worst intersection in town? There you go. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Some obvious common themes here. Most important, I think, almost all of these are basically ad models. There's some subscription revenue, but primarily there's advertising. And there's a strong focus on local news, local activity, local happenings. Very interesting how consistent all that is. One of the questions I have to start with is simply the advertising market in Santa Barbara. Is it elastic, or is it sort of a zero-sum situation where if one of you gets a contract, does that really prevent somebody else from getting that same money? Or is there more money out there under some kind of circumstances? And I don't know who to ask that of.
We have the most ads, and I've never been able to figure that out. So when you find out, please tell me. It's the odd thing about our particular experience has been we've done better in relation to ourselves in worse economic times than in robust economic times. And my two-bit explanation of that has always been the parade of ancillary publications, and now since we're all talking about websites, that exist need to retrench, and they take that money and reinvest it in something that's been proven or has a longer history. Now, when I first started off, I hated that idea because we weren't the oldest player in the game, and now that there's a good case to be made that maybe we are one of the if not the oldest, one of the oldest publishing companies in Santa Barbara. Certainly I'm the most tenured publisher, but irrespective of that, that was my explanation.
Anybody else have a view?
I've never figured out why the Independent has all those ads either, or at least about 30% of them that don't really match. But you know, I think for all of us, that's an interesting question. And you know, Santa Barbara does not have a very large corporate community, and so obviously that's a concern for you know, sustainability for some of these you know, larger projects. And you know, certainly all of us in this room have working with nonprofit groups have encountered that as well. Like Randy, we seem to we're not really getting a lot of pushback despite the uncertain economic times from smaller advertisers, which you know, I'm kind of perplexed by myself, but it's encouraging. So far so good.
Hi, I'll give you a counter side to this thing. What I read is that the growth in advertising is going to come on search, which, you know, portends well for one of you guys in this room, right? Everything you read talks about advertisers wanting to spend more in search. And the other thing is advertisers in search of new ways of getting the message out there. So how many of you use Google Earth? All right? You notice the little red target on top of the buildings now when you go through there? You know, Dayton Hudson is remarkable in terms of marketing and product placement. And they're trying to find, if you won't bring us new product, we'll try to find some other ways to get it out there. So, you know, I think it is a zero-sum game when it comes to traditional forms of advertising. The growth is out there in the new forms, and I think search leads the way for at least the next decade.
Well, I agree. I think that there'll be technological advances that will make it, hopefully, you know, who knows, but that local advertisers will be able to get more from advertising. There'll be like the websites and the businesses will work together as a team to create better opportunities, and I think that's where the future is.
Is there a difference in the pricing between online advertising and print advertising, so that you could argue that the same amount of dollars would buy a lot more advertising, and that's where the elasticity is? Since the onlines don't have the same costs to cover? I see people are making faces here. Get that on TV, right?
The way I see it with print and online advertising is if you buy a print publication and advertising like the Daily Sound, you know, you're getting 10,000 papers a day, which we also estimate are picked up by 2 to 3 people. So 20,000, 25,000 readers a day are seeing your ad. And to buy online advertising, with the web being as fractionalized as it is, in order to reach that same amount of viewership, you'd have to buy, you know, 10 or 15 different websites. So at that cost, it could get a lot more expensive to advertise on the web than it is in print.
Again, I think you're seeing that model shift from when the web first started. You would pay on cost per click or cost per impression, and how many people saw the ad. And what I think online advertisers are demanding more today is paying for ads that people click on and then actually go and buy something. And the web creates, right, Chuck? The web creates the ability, right? Cost per action. The web creates that ability to track, did my ad actually bring me a sale, in a way that traditional media doesn't. You can't say that somebody bought something because they saw an ad in the paper or heard an ad on the radio. But on the web, you can track the user's action from clicking on the ad to the sale.
Well, actually, I disagree with that. Because in print, I mean, if you design the ad properly, you can track if it's successful with coupons or codes and whatnot. So, I mean, it's not entirely true that you can't track it in print.
True, but I mean, the redemption on those, you know, Sunday grocery ads in newspapers, right? You know, a fraction of 1%. And I think, you know, what I used to argue as a publisher is just because they didn't use your coupon doesn't mean they didn't see the ad.
Right.
And I was lying through my hat.
Well, I think there's an issue with local. When you go to a website and click on, like, you know, you type in shoes and shoes.com comes up, and you go there and buy a shoe, that they can attribute that sale to you clicking on the ad. But in a local market, the real estate agent might want their picture up 3,000 times, and they don't click on something to buy a house. But so the problem with local web advertising is traditional web advertising is click model. And we're trying to sell impressions to tell people that we're doing the repetitive thing that is done in the newspaper. So I don't know what the answer is, but I know there's a huge difference between shoes.com and local websites.
Just to back it up a little bit, on the responsiveness of websites versus print, Jeremy very casually dropped in a little, it's not his fault, but a little trickery in there, which is completely unmeasurable and something that I personally rail against with newspapers, is he said we have 10,000 circulation and we approximately get 2 readers per copy, and he multiplied the two numbers, which is a nonsensical result, because he cannot with a straight, he may, but please don't, he cannot with a straight face say that every single one of my copies is picked up by 2 people, therefore I have a 20,000 circulation. The difference between that and in a website is you can go, everyone's here at this table has the ability to go, anyone that owns a website has the ability to truly measure who responded to an ad, who responded to an article, and it's infinitely measurable. I mean, it's astounding the stuff you can do, and we don't utilize half of it, or even a fraction of it, but you can measure everything, and that's a new paradigm for newspapers because they have been relying a little bit on smoke and mirrors, and they have been sitting on their asses and increasing their rates 3% it was like an annuity. It was like every year they had a new rate card, and it was like, well, what did you do for me last year? Worse than that is they didn't even protect their rate. Well, you have a lot to answer for, sir.
Why you're doing something else?
They didn't even protect their rates for their customers. So a contract simply meant that when the rates went up, you would be able to pay the new rates, which I don't really understand that concept of a contract. And this is something that years ago I just thought wasn't really fair to do to our advertisers. So our contracts mean for the life of the contract you signed, your rate is protected at the rate that we charge. We're also kind of stupid in that sense, as we raise our rates about every 3 years or so, and we don't, but I'm not complaining. I'm very happy with our relationship with the community and the responsiveness that the community has shown both for our newspaper and our web product. But the responsibility that newspapers are forced to face now with these competing media, which are measurable in a degree that newspapers just can't be. The standard, for my little form of newspapers, the weekly newspapers, we rely a lot on data from blow-in cards, basically those things that fall out and irritate you, and we ask our readers to respond to a survey on that. The other thing they do is they do phone calls. One of the problems with phone call canvassing of audience is how many people never answer their home phone and only deal with a cell phone. And so newspapers have a lot of catching up to do with what's current, and I think it's good for them, frankly, because it puts the reader in a really nice position to take advantage of. Newspapers are now, instead of being imperious and making decisions that no one has anything to say about, they're now saying, maybe we ought to ask our readers what they want to see in a newspaper. Maybe we ought to ask our advertisers, are our ads working for you? So, end of filibuster.
Before I open this up to the audience, are there any questions any of you would like to ask any of the others of you? What a gentle bunch you are. Okay, well, let's open it up. Who's got a question? Jacques? Okay, the question is for Bill and Peter. How did they get their first 1,000 members? What sort of advertising did they do to sort of prime the pump and get things going?
Well, EdAd has done pretty much no advertising in 5 years, so we just do it by word of mouth. The goal was, Google did it by word of mouth, supposedly, and Facebook and all those places. So the only true web customer is someone who has got it from a friend. So I don't know. You can waste a lot of money on advertising on newspapers, I think.
Same with us at Newshawk. It's all been mostly word of mouth, and then strategic partnerships with nonprofit groups and some other organizations that can in turn send out their stories to their network, which is a way for us to tie into that community.
Okay. Question again for Bill and Peter. How do you establish your initial base rates for advertising? What goes into your thinking in doing that?
Peter says he's going to say the same thing I am, but I don't think he's going to do that. What I did, Newshawk is a little bit different. We were responding to an opportunity to disrupt the marketplace, and so I felt that for our product, that there were certain larger companies in the community who were philanthropically invested in this in Santa Barbara, and were not really pleased with the way things were going in terms of local news coverage. And so what I proposed to do was to go to those companies and say, look, will you provide some seed money to help me get this launched and get the thing going, and then we would circle back around to the smaller advertisers who we would actually have to sell to. And we did get a couple of those larger advertisers, but for the most part, we actually made headway right away with the smaller advertisers. So it was basically, what are our costs? What do we need? Will the marketplace pay that difference?
I have a very bad answer. We picked out of the hat, we picked a penny per impression. I don't know why we got that number. And then we realized that when you try to sell web advertising, it's so hard because everyone asks you these questions. The newspapers have it really easy. They just say, here it is on page 35, you'll have a 4x6 ad and it costs, $300. And then they start asking us questions, how many impressions, how many hits, how many this, what page will it show up on. It's much harder to sell web advertising. So we've simplified a little bit, and we come up with the number $200. So that's our answer.
It's funny that Peter says that because when we sort of relaunched our website in last April, and when we were doing our pricing model, I sort of looked at the CPM and the cost per click and cost per action and all the other little jargonish things that pseudosciences like to surround themselves in, and I since I knew we were going to be pursuing not national ads, and I didn't even want to clutter our website with these service-provided national ads that you can get at a kind of a haberdashery rate. I went to a flat rate model as well, because I thought, what's reasonable? What kind of activity are we going to get on these ads? What are our local people going to want to do, and how can I explain it to them? Because there is, as Peter said, he's very correct in that selling online to mom and pops, which is 90% of the business we do, both for the newspaper and the web, is difficult because they really don't know what's going on. And in many cases, sad to say, our reps don't know what the hell they're selling to. So rather than them say something foolish or out and out lie, we kind of simplified it and said $60. We have both sides at 200, but from $60, I think, is the cheapest thing you can run. But
The question is, actually, I think I can direct it to all of them, right? Is do they think that people will be satisfied with watching YouTube to get their news in the future? Is that a fair characterization? And now you're asking, will they be satisfied to become illiterate, or will they become illiterate? Editorial statement, I guess. Who
Good
wants to
question,
tackle that?
Joe. In the case of my daughter, I'm afraid it's irreversible. But I think Peter's right. It's not so much that the next generation is only interested in easy stuff, and so the video kind of appeals to them, and the social networking thing. It's just it's a cultural shift that has its positives and as well as its negatives. And so I think certainly the YouTube stuff is kind of the easy thing that we can draw out of these shifting dynamics. But over time, that's actually going to accelerate and become more sophisticated. And so I think the culture will adapt. I hope it does not get to the point where it's straight YouTube, but I think 5 years from now, YouTube itself may be something very different.
I think literacy connotes two actions. ability to read and the ability to write. And I want to address them separately. I don't think there's ever been more reading going on in America than there is right now. We have more literacy, you know, more people are able to read in the country than ever before. Magazines, books, all those numbers are on the rise. Even internet usage, it's essentially connotes you're going to read. I do worry about writing skills and erosion of writing skills. Text messaging is the worst enemy of English teachers across America. And I see this in the interns that I hire over the years, that there's very little question on my part, and there's quantitative research that says that their writing skills are declining. Their skills in terms of spelling, syntax, grammar are worse than they were in years gone past. And I think that's a real danger we face, but the reading worries me less than the writing.
Anyone?
Really quick, I want to comment on my son's, he's going to be a senior at Santa Barbara High next year, and his classes, all he does is watch movies. In English class, in history class, you know, he sees like Gladiator. Oh, what did you do in school today? I saw Gladiator. You know, I saw Forrest Gump. Their history class watched Forrest Gump. I think the problem is more than the internet. I think the problem is really big, and you know, the hope is that maybe the videos will be a little better. I don't know. You're fighting something that's very big, I think.
In the back there. There's a concern that there's no good journalism, essentially investigative reporting, being done in Santa Barbara, that if there was really a hard story to dig out, it would be done by the LA Times or somebody else. And so one question is, who's doing good investigative reporting, good journalism? And the second, which I suspect we probably don't want to try to get into in any major way, is how should the news press fix itself or its journalism? And I'm sure there's a lot of opinions on that one, but let's take the first one first.
Well, I think when it comes to news reporting, it's not going to seek you out. I mean, you have to seek out the good quality news reporting. And one of the best journalists in this whole entire town, even before the whole debacle at the Santa Barbara News Press, is Nick Welch, who's the editor of the Santa Barbara Independent. And he's probably one of the best investigative journalists in this town. And the column he writes every week is probably one of the best pieces of journalism you can find in Santa Barbara today. With my paper, The Daily Sound, our whole goal is covering the day-to-day local news, that we really don't delve into long, in-depth investigative pieces either. But when something calls for it, like the recent rise in gang violence and stuff like that, we have hired freelance professional journalists to go out and write in-depth pieces. So that it is being done. It's just, I think you have to be the one looking for it.
Bill.
Can I,
Sorry.
Mike? I think I hate to agree with you because it's sad for our community, but I think you're absolutely right, especially for someone who says he hasn't been here very long. It's a very astute observation. Investigative reporting that is more impactful and requires digging that is simply repertorial is a question of scale. And the news press, being up until even to this day, being the largest news organization in this city, was one of the few outlets that could invest the time and invest really the dollars and cents it takes to achieve what you're searching for. And so the rest of us have all sort of cobbled together an existence. I mean, we've been doing it for a long time as well and trying to do our thing, but we can only do it so often. We have it. Even though I think we have one of the larger news staffs now in this town, we still have a very small staff, and a lot of their time is taken up doing the day-to-day, doing the nuts and bolts of what it takes to, now that we sort of do two forms of news, a daily news and a weekly news. The time it takes to do that, our staff of 12 people is fully invested in simply achieving that. So to do the extra stuff is difficult. We can occasionally achieve it, and sometimes we actually invest in it. But that's one of the tragedies that the news press has done that. You're not going to get it so much on TV. Bill's organization and Jeremy's organization are going to be able to every once in a while maybe hit a little gold, little river of gold, little bit of gold in there. But in general, resourceful, impactful reporting is at a loss in this community. But I would also suggest that it's nationally it's kind of going away too, because Tim was telling me beforehand, he says there's how many dedicated reporters in Iraq?
10 or fewer.
10 or fewer in Iraq. Oh, you said that in your speech, yeah. And that's astounding. to me.
That's from print news organizations, though,
Yeah,
right?
print
Not
news,
counting
yeah.
TV and such.
I just want to say briefly that the bloggers are really the answer to all these questions. And Craig Smith is a great journalist, and I know I've gotten a lot of trouble for saying that in the past, but he's uncovering things that no one else is covering, and it looks to me like other organizations are looking what he's doing and then reporting it. That's what it looks like. So I don't know if you get to Craig Smith and some of these local housing blogs, they all have opinion, but if you can filter out some of the opinion, you can find some real things that they're telling you that no one else is telling you. Maybe that's the only future, is that it's a national problem. It's not just Santa Barbara. The LA Times doesn't have enough investigative journalists, right?
That actually goes back to the seed corn question. You didn't invest in serious reporting. Bill, you had a question. So the question is, do we see the possibility that an online organization could support a major news organization such as you'd find in the New York Times or the Washington Post today, with all of its various special capabilities, et cetera, and just the sheer manpower? Do we see that as a possibility?
I really want to answer this. The only way that's going to happen in Santa Barbara is if those reporters are located in Bangalore, because it is not in the current economic model that most websites, and I'm going to follow closely what Peter's doing and figure out how he's going to do it. But the way most websites are set up, which is trying to aggregate and attract as much traffic as possible and hoping to get a little slim amount of shaving from that stream, there's just the financial model does not hold in that sense. So no, but I'm still hopeful something's going to fall from the sky and bail us all out.
Okay, I'll disagree with you. And this is a case where I think the Bill Gateses of the world are making exactly the mistakes that the newspaper publishers made in the 1990s. There was a movement in Microsoft in the late 1990s, early 2000s to start their own news services, and they gave up on it too quickly. I think the economic model absolutely works, because you take out all the print, you take out all the delivery, you take out all the machinery. It actually works. It's going to take somebody with a lot of money to say, we can lose some money at this for a while. And you know what, when it happens, I think it'll be great, because there'll be more journalists than ever covering local communities. I think it would work, but I think Gates and others are being a little bit chicken about this right now.
Well, I think the whole culture is changing, though. I mean, virtually everybody in here is doing more with less in whatever industry they're in. So I think that old model, old media is kind of on the way out, virtually in every business situation.
The follow-up question, do we think journalism can ever be as good when we have less people doing the same work, or, well, essentially that, more work per person?
Can I comment? I'm a newcomer to this journalism stuff, but one thing I've noticed is at a lot of local events, there's 7 reporters who write the same story. It's incredible inefficiency, and I think maybe that's what's happening in Iraq too. I don't want to speak out of what I don't know, but there's something inefficient about that process that probably will change in the next X number of years. I don't know.
Well, that's entirely right, and that's why wire services were created, because newspapers were sending reporters. Say there's 50 very large newspapers in the United States, and every single one of them was spending the money to send a reporter to Iraq. That gets very expensive. When you could have the Associated Press send 5 reporters and do 5 times the amount of reporting that your one reporter could do, and it costs you, a fifth of what it would just to send your one guy. It's all about making it more economical for the newspapers. But on the other, another thing I want to touch on is the cost of doing a website versus the cost of doing a newspaper, where print is still relatively inexpensive. I mean, it's one of the biggest costs you have when you're putting out a newspaper, but comparatively, it's relatively expensive. The largest cost we have is salaries. And so any website, the largest cost they're going to have is salaries as well. So even if you get rid of the whole print product, you still have a ton of cost there. It's not. And our website costs us $6 a year to maintain. So anything we make off it's profit.
Can I just say one more thing about
Sure.
this question? I love your questions, by the way. Thank you. They're great. I think any journalist today, compared to similar journalists 50 years ago, today is far better than they were 50 years ago. Because the essence of good journalism is research, questioning and research. Do yourself a favor, rent All the President's Men, watch it once and, enjoy Redford and Hoffman and the whole thing. And then watch it again just for the journalism in it, because it's all about finding facts and rechecking them. And so today, for instance, the school district in Ventura hires a new chief financial officer, and 25 years ago, you might wait for 2 or 3 months for a packet from Farmington, Indiana, where you'd find out that this person got fired in Farmington, Indiana for embezzling from the Farmington School District. It would show up in the mail 3 months later. Today, they hire a new CFO at the school district, and the first thing the reporter does is Google the person. And you start doing your research and you find out, what their background is, and find out they did get fired in Farmington and they never get the job. The internet has made journalism far, far better.
You can run, but you can't hide. So the question is that even on something like CNN, you're seeing a lot of what you're calling tabloid news as opposed to real news. And would that same pressure occur in the local markets? Is that fair?
Peter needs to take this one.
Well, the pressure is coming from the readers. The readers want tabloid news. That's the problem. I'm not an advocate of tabloid news, but the problem is there's a market out there and people want tabloid news, and it's terrible. I think. I mean, I don't like it, but it's just a reality, and you can pretend that. I mean, it's the whole idea of democracy. People have to know things, right? How can we have a democracy if we don't have journalism to teach people things and tell them the facts? But if people don't want it, we can lead the horse to water. I don't know. I think there has to be some solution. I don't have the solution. I wish I did. I don't know if I have the solution I can make any money off it either. But I don't know. But I think you're 100% right. It's all tabloid. I think it's accelerating. I mean, look at American Idol. That's what people love. American Idol. Right?
Any other comments?
Yeah, I have a comment. We currently put up somewhere between 500 and 600 articles about Santa Barbara on our website every month. I don't think anyone even comes close to that kind of volume. I don't think we're not immune from soft news, but we certainly don't run tabloid stuff. But I've found just over the last 2 years we've been tracking it, and certainly since last April when we debuted our more or less new website, that boy, if you can get in front of people on information they want, and that's of course a big call, and that's where I think a lot of, I think that's where CNN is missing the boat, because they think people want tabloid crap, and I don't think they really do. But I mean, the editorial judgment call that needs to be made is, what can I interest my audience with after you've identified your audience? And the stuff that other than a few crazy explosions when we get picked up by Drudge and all his readers come and read something on Giuliani, we had some story that the biggest story ever read on our site was 100,000 visitors in one day, and it was on a slightly salaciously misnamed article called Eating French. And it was an article by a really nice journalist who writes about eating the French way to keep your weight off, and somehow that just blew up over 2 days. I think it ended up being like 200,000 visitors came to read that article. But and I don't think they came for the reasons we wanted them to read it. But following news, following information that is important to the community, and that's vague, but it's as specific as I can get, has been our best bet on what people read. And so certainly the Zaka fire last summer, when we were doing hourly updates on events as they were occurring, we had a couple guys in the field. I'm sorry we didn't get video on there, which we were capable of, but didn't end up doing, and not enough photos to suit my fancy. But that was kind of kick-started us into getting kind of a consistent audience. Obviously, that's a big story, really easy to identify, people can chase, but it takes an editorial staff to develop an audience. And I always, it just goes back to my tenets, is if I find it interesting, I'd like to see it up there, as well as it shouldn't just be what I'm interested in either. It should be some other intelligent people that you can hope you can surround yourself with, who have good decision making and broad they're interested, curious, and interested in the world around them. So I think that's what attracts readership. And anyway,
One last question. So the question is, what has changed in the leadership of the larger and smaller news organizations over the years that have led us to surging forward with popular things rather than deeper and more investigative reporting? Anybody want to try to tackle that?
well, I think the economic model of newspapers is partly responsible for that, because they're like a shark. They have to keep going forward. They have to keep devouring more and more trees and more and more, attract more and more advertisers to sustain themselves. And now they have, as Tim mentioned, now they have the responsibility to their shareholders to bring a return on what they're doing. I don't think it breeds good newspapers. I don't think it breeds good journalism. And I think those two models contribute to the excesses we see here. I also think papers get too big for their britches. I don't know if CNN needs to be as big as it is and run all that crap that they run down the side and get in the way of real news, because they're going massive. They're trying to get a bigger audience than they probably can sustain. And one of the more interesting developments in daily newspapers, which I truly don't track, but I am aware of the Bakersfield Californian, instead of chasing a perpetual circulation model, they and tell me if I get this story wrong, but the publisher said, you know what, I think our circulation shouldn't be 150,000 or whatever the hell it was before a couple of years ago, and they said, I think it's reasonably, we have a core audience of about 87,000 people. They dropped their circulation to that size, and that has led to more sustainability for them. They weren't running 70,000 more copies every day, 365 days a year, wasting all that money in a vain effort to attract more advertisers, which they were losing anyway. So I think you'll see more of that. And unfortunately, what I see daily newspapers doing is cutting their news staff and their news whole, which is the most insane idea. They're diluting their product and want you to read them more. It's crazy.
Okay. Tim?
And I just think that the advent of the 24/7 news cycle has created this vacuum that just sucks in all sorts of stuff that used to not be called news, but to fill that 24/7. There's a famous memo I'm sure all these guys have heard about, that earlier this year the chief of bureau of the AP in Los Angeles wrote a 4-word memo: Britney Spears is news. You know, and it reverberated throughout the industry that, you know, the Associated Press, the largest news organization in the world, continues that poor woman's mental issues to be news. And I think it's a sad commentary, but fed by that need to feed the beast.
Okay, well, I think we're at 8 o'clock, which is the time we stop. Obviously, you'd be more than welcome to come up and continue to talk informally. If you're not on our email list, just go to www.centralcoastmit.com and register so that you get our emails. That way you'll also know what the program will be for September 17th, and hopefully you'll come to some of our programs again next year. I want to thank our panelists. This was terrific. And Randy, I want to thank you for the little goodie bag.
Yes.
And
Please take those. I don't want to carry them out of here.
doesn't want to carry them home. So that's it. Thank you very much.